May 6, 1937. The skies above Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey appeared calm as the world's largest passenger airship prepared for what should have been an ordinary landing. After completing a transatlantic journey from Frankfurt, Germany, the LZ-129 Hindenburg was only moments away from the end of another successful voyage. Inside, passengers gathered by the windows, watching the American coastline give way to open fields below. On the ground, dozens of crew members stood ready at their assigned positions, waiting to guide the enormous airship toward its mooring mast. Nothing seemed unusual, nothing appeared out of place. To everyone watching, this was simply another routine arrival. Then, a small flash appeared near the tail of the airship. Within seconds, flames erupted and raced through the giant structure with astonishing speed. In less than a minute, the largest and most celebrated airship ever built collapsed in full view of hundreds of eyewitnesses, and news cameras captured nearly every moment. The Hindenburg disaster was not the deadliest tragedy in aviation history, yet few accidents have had such a profound impact. In just 34 seconds, decades of engineering ambition, public confidence, and dreams of luxury air travel came to an abrupt end. The age of the great passenger airship was over. But what really happened aboard the Hindenburg that evening? Was hydrogen solely responsible? Could static electricity have ignited the fire? Or is the true cause still hidden within one of aviation's greatest unsolved mysteries? This is the story of the Hindenburg disaster, 34 seconds that changed aviation forever. If you enjoy stories of history, tragedy, and real events that changed the world, welcome to Missing History. Let's uncover the past, one story at a time. When humanity believed the future belonged to the sky, long before the age of jumbo jets and non-stop international flights, crossing the Atlantic Ocean was an undertaking measured not in hours, but in days. For most travelers during the early 20th century, the only practical way to journey between Europe and North America was aboard a great ocean liner. These ships were comfortable and dependable, but they were slow. A voyage across the Atlantic often required nearly a week at sea, with passengers spending days surrounded by nothing but open water. By the early 1930s, aviation was advancing at an extraordinary pace. Engineers were building faster and more capable airplanes, and each new design pushed the boundaries of what seemed possible. Yet commercial aviation still faced significant limitations. Passenger aircraft could carry only a relatively small number of people, their range was limited, and long-distance flights required multiple refueling stops. Crossing the Atlantic by airplane remained an unfamiliar experience, and many travelers still questioned whether such journeys could ever become truly practical or reliable. The world was waiting for something better, something that could combine the speed of flight with the comfort of an ocean liner. Surprisingly, many believed they had already found the answer. It was the airship. Unlike a free-floating balloon, an airship could be navigated with remarkable precision, powered by multiple engines and controlled by rudders and elevators. It was capable of following planned routes across vast distances. Unlike an airplane, however, it did not rely on wings to remain aloft. Instead, its enormous envelope was filled with a lifting gas, either hydrogen or helium, which was lighter than the surrounding air. This allowed engineers to build aircraft on a scale that conventional airplanes could not yet achieve. Airships were large enough to accommodate passenger cabins, dining rooms, lounges, fuel, cargo, and supplies for journeys that stretched across entire oceans. Better still, they required far less engine power to remain airborne than heavier-than-air aircraft. To many engineers of the time, the concept seemed almost revolutionary. The story of the rigid airship began at the close of the 19th century. In 1900, a retired German army officer named Count Ferdinand von Zeppelin successfully demonstrated the world's first practical rigid airship. His achievement was so influential that his surname soon became synonymous with the aircraft itself. Even today, many people continue to refer to rigid airships simply as Zeppelins. Over the decades that followed, German engineers refined the design with remarkable success. Each new airship became larger, stronger, and more dependable than the one before it. What had once been viewed as an ambitious experiment gradually evolved into a practical means of long-distance transportation. That progress reached a new milestone with the arrival of Graf Zeppelin, officially designated LZ-127. The airship quickly earned an international reputation for reliability. It crossed the Atlantic not once, but hundreds of times, carrying businessmen, diplomats, celebrities, journalists, and ordinary passengers between Europe and the Americas. It also completed journeys to destinations around the world, proving that intercontinental air travel by airship was not only possible, but commercially viable. Its safety record was equally impressive. During its operational career, Graf Zeppelin traveled more than 1 million miles and completed hundreds of long-distance flights, with remarkably few serious incidents. With every successful voyage, public confidence grew stronger. People no longer regarded airships as experimental machines. They saw them as the future. Traveling aboard an airship was unlike flying in an airplane. The cabins were spacious. The journey was smooth and remarkably quiet. Passengers could stroll through elegant lounges, dine while looking out over the clouds, and experience long-distance air travel in a level of comfort that few airplanes of the era could match. To many wealthy travelers, it was the closest thing to a luxury hotel suspended in the sky. By the mid-1930s, many believed that the future of transatlantic travel would belong neither to ocean liners nor to conventional aeroplanes. Instead, they imagined enormous passenger airships connecting continents in comfort and style. That vision no longer seemed like science fiction. It appeared to be unfolding before their eyes. Determined to turn that vision into reality, the German company Luftschiffbau Zeppelin began constructing the largest passenger airship ever conceived. The project demanded years of engineering and development. When construction was finally completed in 1935, the result astonished the world. It was called the LZ-129 Hindenburg. At approximately 245 meters in length and 41 meters in height, the Hindenburg was almost as long as the RMS Titanic. Inside were passenger cabins, elegant dining facilities, lounges, and even a designated smoking room, an extraordinary feature aboard an aircraft. But the Hindenburg's greatest achievement was neither its size nor its luxury. It was its ability to cross the Atlantic in as little as 2 to 3 days, nearly twice as fast as the finest ocean liners of the era. To many observers, the Hindenburg did not simply represent another technological achievement. It represented the future of global travel. Yet beneath its elegant exterior lay a critical compromise. The Hindenburg had originally been designed to use helium, an inert gas that does not burn. Unfortunately for Germany, the vast majority of the world's helium supply was controlled by the United States. As political relations between the two nations deteriorated during the 1930s, the American government refused to export helium for use in German airships. With virtually no alternative available, the builders turned instead to hydrogen. Hydrogen provided excellent lifting power and could be produced domestically. But it carried one serious disadvantage: it was highly flammable. Even so, the decision attracted surprisingly little concern at the time. Many earlier airships had operated safely using hydrogen for years, leading both engineers and passengers to believe that the risk could be managed. Few could have imagined that this choice would later become one of the most debated aspects of one of aviation's greatest disasters. In 1937, however, almost no one believed that the Hindenburg represented danger. To the world, it represented progress. It represented luxury, and above all, it represented the future. The final voyage. On May 3, 1937, the LZ-129 Hindenburg departed from Frankfurt, Germany, beginning what was expected to be another routine crossing of the Atlantic. It was the airship's 63rd transatlantic voyage, a route it had flown many times before. On board were 36 passengers and 61 crew members, a total of 97 people. Some were returning home, others were traveling on business. For a few, the journey itself was part of the experience. Flying aboard the Hindenburg was still considered one of the most exclusive ways to cross the Atlantic. Few travelers could afford it, and fewer still would ever forget it. For the next 3 days, the voyage unfolded exactly as planned. Cruising at approximately 125 to 130 kilometers per hour, the giant airship moved steadily westward above the Atlantic Ocean. Unlike the constant vibration of an airplane, life aboard the Hindenburg was remarkably peaceful. Passengers enjoyed meals in the dining room, relaxed in the lounge, wrote postcards, read newspapers, and watched the endless ocean drift slowly beneath them. For many, it felt less like flying and more like staying in a luxury hotel that happened to float through the sky. Nothing during the crossing suggested that this voyage would be remembered any differently from the dozens that had come before it. As the Hindenburg approached the eastern coast of the United States, however, conditions began to change. Storm clouds gathered over Lakehurst, New Jersey. Thunderstorms moved across the area, bringing strong winds, rain, and the possibility of lightning. Such weather posed a serious challenge for any airship attempting to land. Unlike an airplane, an airship presented an enormous surface to the wind, making precise control far more difficult during the final approach. The unstable atmosphere also increased the likelihood of static electrical charges building up on the airship's exterior, something that would later become central to the investigation. Recognizing the danger, Captain Max Pruss decided not to attempt an immediate landing. Instead, he kept the Hindenburg safely airborne, circling the area while waiting for the weather to improve. It was a cautious decision, and an entirely reasonable one. The safety of the passengers and crew came before keeping to the schedule. For nearly an hour, the giant airship remained in the skies above New Jersey, patiently waiting for the storm to pass. Gradually, the weather began to improve. The rain eased, the winds became more manageable. Finally, the control tower at Lakehurst Naval Air Station gave permission for the Hindenburg to begin its landing approach. Relief spread through the airship. After more than 3 days at sea and in the air, the journey was almost over. Passengers gathered their belongings. Some stood by the windows to watch the landing. Others simply looked forward to stepping onto solid ground after another successful Atlantic crossing. To everyone on board, it appeared that the flight was about to end exactly as expected. No one realized that they were only minutes away from becoming part of one of the most unforgettable moments in aviation history. 34 seconds that changed aviation forever. To understand what happened aboard the Hindenburg that evening, it is first necessary to understand how an airship landed. Unlike an airship could not simply descend onto a runway under its own momentum. Instead, it relied on a carefully coordinated procedure involving both the flight crew and a large team of ground personnel. At the center of that operation stood a tall steel structure known as the mooring mast. As the airship approached, crew members aboard released heavy landing lines from the nose. Ground crews caught the lines and gradually guided the massive aircraft into position. Only after the nose had been securely attached to the mooring mast could the remainder of the landing process begin. Every movement had to be carefully controlled. Even a moderate change in wind could affect an airship measuring nearly a quarter of a kilometer in length. On the evening of May 6, 1937, after completing its first Atlantic crossing of the season, the Hindenburg finally arrived over Lakehurst Naval Air Station in New Jersey. The arrival of the world's largest passenger airship had attracted widespread attention. Journalists, photographers, radio reporters, and curious spectators gathered around the landing field, eager to witness the return of one of the greatest engineering achievements of its time. For many people, this was their first opportunity to see the Hindenburg with their own eyes. What they expected to witness was another routine landing. Instead, they were about to watch one of the most unforgettable disasters ever captured on film. After waiting nearly an hour for the weather to improve, the Hindenburg finally received clearance to land. Although conditions had become safer, strong winds still swept across the airfield. To compensate, Captain Max Pruss chose to perform what was known as a high landing. Rather than descending immediately to its usual height, the airship remained higher than normal, while the landing lines were lowered to the waiting ground crew. From there, the crew on the ground would gradually pull the enormous aircraft toward the mooring mast before securing its nose. It was a well-established procedure. The Hindenburg had completed similar landings many times before. Nothing about the operation suggested that anything was wrong. At approximately 7:21 p.m., the landing lines fell toward the ground. Ground crew members quickly moved into position and began pulling the giant airship toward the mast. For a few brief moments, everything appeared completely routine. Then, witnesses noticed something unusual. Near the tail of the Hindenburg, a small flash of light appeared. Some described it as little more than a brief flicker. Others recalled seeing a tiny burst of flame. Whatever it was, it lasted only an instant. The next moment, the impossible happened. Flames suddenly erupted at the rear of the airship. Within seconds, the fire spread through the enormous structure with astonishing speed. Crew members immediately attempted to respond, but events unfolded far too quickly for any meaningful action. The giant framework began to twist under the intense heat. As the stern collapsed toward the ground, the bow rose sharply into the air, leaving the entire airship suspended at a dramatic angle. What had been one of the greatest achievements in aviation engineering was now being destroyed before hundreds of eyewitnesses. Inside the passenger decks, panic erupted. Some passengers rushed desperately toward the exits. Others made a split-second decision to jump. Although the airship was still more than 10 meters above the ground, many believed that leaping offered a better chance of survival than remaining inside the burning aircraft. For some, that decision saved their lives. For others, there was simply no time left to escape. The disaster unfolded so rapidly that every second mattered. Newsreel cameras continued rolling. Photographers kept pressing their shutters. Within approximately 34 seconds, the Hindenburg had been completely engulfed by fire. The magnificent airship that had once symbolized luxury, innovation, and the future of air travel was reduced to a twisted steel skeleton lying on the ground. Because so many journalists were present that evening, the disaster was documented from multiple angles. Those haunting images spread across newspapers, cinemas, and radio broadcasts around the world. More than 90 years later, they remain among the most recognizable images in the history of aviation, not simply because an airship was lost, but because an entire era ended before the world's eyes. The mystery that remains unsolved. The destruction of the Hindenburg lasted only 34 seconds, yet in that brief span of time, one of the greatest achievements in aviation history was reduced to a smoldering wreck. Remarkably, the disaster was not as deadly as many people have assumed. Of the 97 people aboard the airship, 35 lost their lives, including 13 passengers and 22 crew members. One member of the ground crew was also killed, bringing the total death toll to 36. The survival of so many people was extraordinary, considering the speed and intensity of the fire. But once the rescue efforts were over, another question immediately took center stage. What had caused the Hindenburg to burst into flames? For nearly 90 years, that question has never been answered with complete certainty. Investigators examined the wreckage. Witnesses were interviewed. Engineers studied photographs, newsreel footage, and technical records. Despite decades of research, no single explanation has gained universal acceptance. Instead, several competing theories have emerged, each attempting to explain how the disaster began. One of the earliest theories was sabotage. Because the Hindenburg was not only a passenger airship, but also a powerful symbol of German engineering. Some believed it had been deliberately destroyed. Speculation ranged from hidden explosives to politically motivated acts of sabotage. However, extensive investigations failed to uncover convincing evidence that anyone had intentionally caused the disaster. No explosive device was ever found, and no suspect was linked to the fire. As a result, the sabotage theory gradually lost credibility among most historians. Another possibility focused on the airship itself. Could one of the engines have produced a spark? Could an electrical component or onboard equipment have malfunctioned during the landing? Investigators carefully examined these possibilities as well. Yet once again, the available evidence proved insufficient. Although mechanical failure could not be ruled out completely, no conclusive proof was ever discovered to show that it had started the fire. Today, the explanation considered most likely by many researchers involves static electricity. On the afternoon of the disaster, the Hindenburg had flown through rain showers and unstable weather conditions. Those conditions may have allowed electrical charges to accumulate on the outer skin of the airship. When the landing lines were dropped to the ground, those charges may have discharged suddenly, producing a spark near the tail of the aircraft. Interestingly, this theory closely matches the testimony of several eyewitnesses, many of whom reported seeing a brief flash of light just moments before the flames appeared. Even so, a spark alone cannot explain the extraordinary speed of the fire. A spark can ignite a fire. It cannot, by itself, explain why the Hindenburg was consumed so rapidly. For that reason, many researchers believe another factor was involved. One widely discussed possibility is that hydrogen had leaked from one or more of the airship's gas cells. If escaping hydrogen mixed with air before being ignited by a spark, the resulting fire could have spread from one gas cell to the next with devastating speed. That sequence would help explain how such an enormous aircraft was engulfed in flames in only 34 seconds. Not everyone agrees with that conclusion. Another group of researchers argues that the hydrogen was not the first material to ignite. Instead, they suggest that the outer fabric covering of the Hindenburg caught fire first. Only afterward, they argue, did the flames penetrate the hydrogen-filled gas cells inside the airship, dramatically accelerating the destruction. This alternative explanation remains the subject of continuing debate among historians and aviation specialists. More than 90 years have passed since the Hindenburg disaster. Countless investigations, scientific studies, and engineering analyses have attempted to determine exactly what happened during those final moments. Yet no single theory has answered every question. Today, many historians and aviation engineers believe the disaster was probably not the result of one isolated failure. Instead, it was likely the consequence of several factors occurring at the same time, including severe weather, static electricity, the possible leakage of hydrogen, and the materials used in the airship's construction. Whatever the precise cause may have been, one fact remains beyond dispute. The Hindenburg disaster forever changed the world's perception of passenger airships. From that day forward, what had once symbolized the future of air travel became a lasting reminder of how quickly even humanity's greatest technological ambitions can come to an end. The end of the airship era. The destruction of the Hindenburg marked far more than the loss of a single aircraft. It marked the end of an idea. For decades, airships had represented one of humanity's boldest visions of the future. They promised a new way to travel, one that combined the speed of flight with the comfort and elegance of an ocean liner. To many people, they seemed destined to dominate long-distance air travel for generations to come. In less than a minute, that confidence vanished. Although investigators had not yet determined the exact cause of the disaster, public opinion changed almost immediately. Newspapers around the world published dramatic photographs of the burning airship. Newsreel footage brought the tragedy into movie theaters. Radio broadcasts carried eyewitness accounts to millions of listeners. The images were impossible to ignore. For the public, it no longer mattered whether the fire had been caused by hydrogen, static electricity, sabotage, or some combination of factors. The Hindenburg had become a symbol of risk rather than progress. Confidence in passenger airships collapsed almost overnight. Commercial passenger airship travel soon came to an end. Germany completed one final rigid airship, the LZ-130 Graf Zeppelin II. Despite its advanced design, it never entered regular commercial passenger service. The era of luxury transatlantic airship travel had already passed. The future was moving in another direction. At the same time, airplane technology was advancing at an extraordinary pace. Aircraft became faster, more reliable, and capable of flying greater distances without the limitations that had once favored airships. As commercial airlines expanded across the world, the giant passenger airship gradually disappeared from international travel. What had once seemed like the future became a fascinating chapter in aviation history. More than 90 years have passed since that evening at Lakehurst, yet the image of the Hindenburg consumed by flames remains one of the most recognizable moments ever recorded in aviation. Not because it claimed the greatest number of lives, not because it was the largest aircraft ever destroyed, but because it shattered one of humanity's greatest technological dreams. The Hindenburg was built to demonstrate what the future of air travel could become. Instead, it became the event that convinced the world to look elsewhere. In many ways, the disaster did not simply end the age of the passenger airship, it accelerated the beginning of the modern age of commercial aviation. Today, the Hindenburg is remembered not only as one of aviation's greatest tragedies, but also as a reminder that even the most ambitious technologies can disappear when public confidence is lost. History is filled with inventions that seem destined to shape the future. Some fulfilled that promise. Others became remarkable detours along the way. The Hindenburg belongs to the latter. Its story is not simply about fire. It is a story of ambition, of innovation, of confidence, and of how, in just 34 seconds, the future that millions believed in vanished forever. This was the story of the Hindenburg disaster, 34 seconds, that changed aviation forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey through history. If you enjoyed this documentary and would like to explore more remarkable stories from the past, please consider liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and joining us again for another journey into history. Until next time, this is Missing History. Thank you for watching.